We are joined this half hour by a relatively new delegate, but one who's making great strides in the legislature, Mr. Ryan Browning from the 28th. Is that Wayne County, Ryan?
It is Wayne County. Good morning. How are you guys?
Good morning.
Doing great.
Now, in your day job, Ryan, what do you do in your day job, just to give people some, this is the first time you're on, so give some people some background of what you do and things you're interested in.
Sure, absolutely. So I'm a business owner here in Wayne County. I have an auto transport company that transports cars to and from auctions to car dealers and stuff to that nature. And then I also have a real estate rental business that I have here locally that's throughout the tri-state.
What are some of the things that you were working on or was important to Wayne County? Obviously, we're all the way up here in the Eastern Panhandle. What made you run, and what are the things that are important to you?
So the main reason I ran is for economic development. And, looking back over the last 12, 15 years here in the county, we've seen a lot of decline in not only jobs but also population. And if you start looking around, it's a direct result of the closing of a couple of coal mines around here and just the decline of all the support jobs for that stuff. And I really thought it was important for me to get involved just so that I could start, I would love to be in a room when some of these opportunities come available so that I can pitch our county and our area and our resources to some of these companies that are looking to relocate to West Virginia and basically be a seat at the table and help promote that and promote our county and help hopefully land some jobs back here in our community so we can start building it back up to what it was, just a few years ago.
Now, I was driving back from Carter H because 79 was closed. I saw a coal mine up close, relatively close to us. I think it was Mineral County, right around there. When a coal mine, it's a big operation. When a coal mine closes, Ron, what happens? Does all that infrastructure just disappear all of a sudden? Or, what happens to your county when a coal mine shuts down?
That's a great question. So particularly in ours, we had a mine shut down, I believe it was in 2011. And, the first thing you see, of course, is all the folks that looking for jobs and reaching out and trying to figure something out for their families. But, what you don't really count on is, all of the trucking companies. We had 3 or 4 trucking companies in the region that basically disappeared overnight. So then you got 20, 30 truck drivers now looking for jobs. Then you see the machine shops that are, they're doing specialty machining to keep these coal mines up with their parts and whatnot. You start seeing them disappear or move to areas where they can sell their product a little more efficiently. But and then you start looking at the grocery store. Grocery store just shut down in Wayne about a year and a half ago. They don't have as much business going on now. You see there's a mechanic shop that used to work on all the trucks for them that they've really had to transition their business, and you've seen a huge slowdown in what's going on with them, and then all the way down to the restaurants. You talk to some of the local restaurant owners, and they're saying they're doing 20-30% of what they were doing just a few years ago, and it makes you realize that not only did you lose 200-300 jobs in a coal mine, but now you're losing an additional 200 or 300 jobs around the coal mine and support staff, support companies, and drivers and everything else. So it's really a multi-tiered problem that ends up happening whenever you see a big operation like a coal mine go out in a community, and especially in a rural community where there's not a whole lot of other development going on, and there aren't very many opportunities to go with those as well. So it's tough to kind of rebound or transition to another job whenever something like that goes out, just because the geographical location really puts some limits on what could go back in there or what could come into the area and really subsidize those jobs that have been lost.
So why didn't people just learn to code the way that President Biden had suggested during these times? Not a real question.
That may be the most frustrating question ever. It's taking, a fish and saying, hey, I know you've been swimming your entire life, but we want you to climb this tree now. So, that's a difficult and
it's
don't
a
get me
horrific
wrong,
state.
It's not lost on me that there's some very intelligent people that work in coal mines and could transition to some other opportunities like that in the technical field. But to just say, hey, I know you've been doing this for 40 years, now you need to go learn how to do this, it's pretty difficult.
So what is the way out? I mean, it seems to me there's a cycle here that I presume that people are leaving the county to go see other opportunities. Is that true?
Yeah.
Okay. So
Yeah,
there comes a
absolutely.
point that will depress real estate values. It's kind of like Detroit a few years ago. Detroit has made this big comeback from just nothing. Is there a particular kind of industry you're trying to attract there to spark a comeback?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the blue collar worker is still a viable option in this area. And that's one of the things that I've been working with our fellow delegates and our county commission here is just identifying areas in our county to where we could attract some new business into the region and then provide some of those jobs that will end up having a lot of those residual jobs that come off of it. We particularly, in my area, we have an airport that is very, it's well utilized on one side of the property, but on the back side of the property, there's some land that we are looking at. Several companies coming in there right now. I know that some other legislators have worked really hard on that prior to me getting into office, and being able to be a part of some of the success going forward would be tremendous for our area. We've identified some other regions in our county that we think we can transition and bring in some of those jobs. The blue collar jobs that are still require machining, still require that kind of that dirty work, if you want to call it that. That I think would benefit our area. But the other thing that we are looking at. Me personally, have been looking at is like the Nucor project. It's about 45 minutes from here, but I see that affecting my area as well and kind of sucking out the remainder of some of these blue-collar jobs if we don't pivot and transition and figure out a way to keep some of those guys here with some other industries. It's funny you mentioned Detroit. I actually was born in Detroit, so I keep a close eye on it. And, one of the things that happened in Detroit was Dan Gilbert purchased a ton of property up there and then pumped in money and redeveloped it through private funds. If we could see something similar to that happen in this region, I think that would be very beneficial as far as developing jobs through the private sector versus waiting on the government to kind of hand something out to us. So, we aren't looking for a handout. We're just looking for opportunities whenever it comes to development in our communities. And we have people that are willing to work here. The unfortunate part is there's not a ton of that opportunity here right now, so that's what we've had to focus on and trying to bring some of that stuff back.
Ron, there's been quite a bit of talk about expanding broadband coverage throughout the state. I would think that probably your section of the state would need broadband coverage more than others. What would that do to the economic development if you had broadband coverage fully implemented?
That's a great question. So we've actually had a lot of broadband development in the county. So that is one of the things that we can offer out the gate. Now, when you get to the southern part of the county, it gets a little bit sparse. But as far as the middle part of the county and up in northern areas, there's a lot of broadband that's already been put in place. So we have those capabilities currently that we can offer to some of these companies. We also have really invested, you start talking about infrastructure, the community is really invested in a water project that's going on right now that will run a larger water line from the northern part of the county to the central part, and we've ran a dedicated power line from the southern part of the county to the north that has all been accounted for as far as looking into the development as far as bringing in another company that would need those utilities. So, it's a great question as far as broadband goes, but I think that when you start looking at it, we have really focused on developing all of the infrastructure at this point. The only thing we're really missing going through the county would be a little bit of an upgrade in the road structure, but that's a whole other conversation for another day.
What's the source of your water? You say you're bringing it from the northern to the middle part. What's the source?
So Canova Water, Canova's a small town right here. It's the most western point of West Virginia. They have their water treatment plant, and they serve the majority of the northern part of the county. And so a few years ago, they had identified a need to run a larger. So I don't know the exact parameters of the line that's running currently, but they're expanding that up to a 12-inch line. So they'll have a lot more flow and capability going south into the county.
Where does the actual water come from, Ron? Does it come from the river?
Big Sandy River.
Okay.
Looking at your legislative bills that you've sponsored, Ryan, I noticed Coach Protection Act. What is that, please?
Great question. So that bill was put in place. I drafted that bill because I've seen a little bit of a big uptick in coaches, or let's say parents or just people attending games that were getting more and more hostile towards not only officials but coaching staff and assistant coaches, trainers, that kind of stuff. And you've seen a few incidents in my county specifically where a parent came out of the stands and punched a coach. He actually missed the first coach and hit a second one inadvertently. He wasn't even kicked out of the game at first. So, and then there was another incident where a parent came out of the stands and spit in a coach's face after a game was over. And, that parent was still allowed to participate and come see games and all that stuff. And, the biggest issue that I've seen with is there's no automatic triggers for these guys. And sometimes these coaches they fear retaliation if they do press charges. And it was difficult for, them to go through the process of having these people not only charged and prosecuted, but then removed from the further attending these games. So what my intent was on the bill was to hopefully put in some deterrence to where, these guys, hey, if you come out of the stands and touch someone that's participating in a game, then you're going to be suspended not only for the game, but also for a year of participating or showing up to these games, and you're going to miss a lot of time seeing your children play in sports and whatnot. And I thought some automatic triggers need to be in place so it takes the onus off of the victim, and would have the effect of they didn't have to feel pressured or feel threatened later on of any type of retaliation if they were to press charges. So that was the reasoning for the bill. There were some things that we ended up getting changed in that bill. It ended up being a Senate bill in the end, and some of the penalties that were in place they were pretty harsh. And while I agree with the penalties that were in there, I completely understand why they were vetoed, since it did raise some of the levels above what it would be if you assaulted a police officer. So I've actually corrected a little bit of that bill and redrafted it, and hopefully it'll go in early this year and we'll get it through.
So, Ryan, let's talk about your big, beautiful bill, the psychedelic one. While it didn't get passed, can you explain to the folks about this? Start from the beginning and give us the story about why you crafted it, and what are some of the things that you're doing with the ibogaine?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was actually driving home from Columbus and was listening to a podcast like everyone else, and a guy named Brian Hubbard and former Governor of Texas Rick Perry were on the Joe Rogan show, and they started talking about this drug that was a single-dose drug that they were giving to patients with TBIs or post-traumatic stress disorder and also opioid use disorder, and seeing tremendous results after single treatment. And, when you start hearing the stories, continuously about folks that have traveled to a clinic in Mexico and had this treatment done, and the results and the benefits that they've seen out of it when they've come home, and it was really eye-opening to me, and it sent me down a path or a rabbit hole, if you will, of, what exactly was ibogaine and why it wasn't being used in the States, and, several other factors of what was going on with it. And it was really interesting to me. But, it's a root derived from a tree in Africa called the iboga tree, and it's a psychedelic. It's labeled as a psychedelic, and so forth. It was a Schedule 1 drug, so they had banned it in the United States as far as use goes. And so there's an issue, right? So our attempt was to set West Virginia up to where if we were able to get it through the FDA for clinical trials, then we could be one of the first states to be involved with that. Unfortunately, it didn't make it through the Senate. It passed through the House. I believe it was 97-1 or 97-2, something like that. And it got stalled up in the Senate. But it's another one that I can't even wrap my head around what the difference would be in this state if we had a single use or a single dose product versus the treatments, the treatment plans that are being used now for opioid use disorder, as well as some of the TBIs and PTSD. And it goes along with the workforce participation rate. I think it really would help, several factors if we actually had something that was more efficient and more effective than what the status quo is. And so that was the reason why I went down that path. Just, I think it's worth West Virginia's time to, really look into something that could have a real impact on the treatment community and, actually getting people off of drugs versus just continuously kicking the can down the road. And I think that it was, it's something that we could still probably go down that road with it, but we just got to tweak some things and make sure that we get it through this time.
Ron, is that House Bill 3306?
No, sir. I believe it was House Bill 3344.
Okay, because House Bill 3306 is one that you sponsor as well. It has the involuntary treatment for substance use disorder. Mm-hmm. The involuntary is a trigger in this bill.
Yeah, that was a bill that I sponsored. I modeled it after a Kentucky bill. I believe it's called Casey's Law. And it would allow parents or guardians or, family members to involuntary commit someone to a treatment facility if they met all the triggers. There were several different triggers in there that would have to take place prior to them being able to do that. But it would be something that would take place over time, and it was, it would have to meet legal muster. I sponsored that bill for a family member, for a member of my community that has a family member that's kind of going through this process, and they were really adamant about trying to get some legislation on the books, and I was, very sympathetic and wanted to try and get something through for them. That bill, we didn't get it to a committee at that point. It was introduced pretty late, but it is very similar to a law that was passed. I'd have to do some research and find some of the date on it, but we did pass something similar to that this legislative session on the last night. It was a Mike Stewart bill, and I would have to go back and look for it.
Yeah, I think we did. I totally hear what you're saying there. As a parent who's going through this, and I know there's Fourth Amendment rights on this, and there's got to be, but when somebody is continuously overdosing, that is a threat to themselves. So, back to the ibogaine. That bill was for clinical trials. If that bill passed, could they actually do trials in West Virginia, even if it was a Schedule 1 drug federally?
It would have to be FDA approved, but I believe that is correct.
But they could ask for the FDA approval to do the trials. Is that
correct?
Hearing that correctly?
That's the way I understood it. And I don't know if you saw, but Texas actually passed an ibogaine trials bill and allocated $50 million to the trials. So they are set up. I believe it's for 2026. They're working on it now to get those FDA approvals to start the trials. But Texas is, from what I see, is the first state to actually push this with some money behind it. But I would like to see West Virginia follow suit just because of the impact it would have on our state. And we talked about, you've heard a lot about Medicaid over the past few weeks here. West Virginia spends about $160 million a year with Medicaid and opioid use treatments. So just the impact there would be tremendous for our state, not to mention the economic development factors and just, the other part is actually seeing family members get a treatment that's going to help them versus, be a supplemental drug at this point.
Is the medical community on board with this in West Virginia?
All of the medical professionals that I spoke to were, although some were skeptical, don't get me wrong, there were definitely some skeptics. There were several that had approached me about the idea of doing this. And, by no means am I endorsing Ibogaine as the cure for something, but I think that, just hearing the results of others, if you start doing a little bit of research, you'll see some of the names out there. There's current Congress members that have family that have done this treatment, and the results are staggering. And, I think that it would be a disservice to our community if we didn't try and find something that would help with this community and help getting people off of drugs and, having people with TBIs and PTSD that, could find something that's more of a viable solution than what we currently have.
What was the pushback in the Senate? Why didn't they take it up? And do you think because it had your name on it that it didn't get taken up?
I can't verify whether it's because of my name on the bill or not, but it made it through committee unanimously. It made it through to the floor and was on third reading and was postponed 2 days at the end there. I'm sure there was some jockeying and some negotiating going on in the background, and unfortunately, sometimes things become a casualty of that stuff, and this was one of the bills that did. I hope to introduce it a lot earlier this cycle, and I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about Delegate Worrell and Delegate Height's work on this. They were both tremendous of helping and crafting this bill and, working to get it through.
Yeah, you can't be nice about height on this show. That's a definite no-no.
Well, this drug, I'm online here, and of course I become a medical expert when I read Wikipedia, but
Sure.
This apparently comes from, originally used by Central African rituals, and it's got very strong hallucinogenic and dream-inducing properties. And is that part of the pushback you're getting? It seems like trading a drug for a drug.
We get about 30 seconds for that answer, Ryan.
Yeah, so that was not the pushback. There's absolutely zero recreational properties to this drug. It's actually a very miserable experience, and a lot of these guys they discussed it at length in their recovery efforts. So that wasn't it. It was more, there was a cardiac event that could...
Ryan, I really appreciate it. We are out of time. We're up against a hard break. Thank you so much for your time. Hopefully we'll have you on again soon. I look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks.